Oh, hello. Welcome to the Squirrel Squadron. A whole 3 minutes late. Many apologies. Technical difficulties, and guess how I resolved them? I turned the camera off and on again. It's really true. There's actually, maybe I'll do an event on this sometime. There's really an excellent reason why turning computer systems off and on again makes them work much better. It's actually not because they're broken. Well, it is because they're broken, but it's not because the world is an evil place and it hates you. It's because actually computer systems are very complicated entities and you get into funny states. So welcome to the Squirrel Squadron. Very glad that you're here to talk about agencies. I was thinking I was going to need to wear some protective gear because I think we have some people from agencies who are signed up and are coming here. Don't worry, I'm not going to beat you up. I'm not going to say that agencies are the worst thing ever. I'm going to say that they're potentially dangerous, and I will explain why. Now, we had camera difficulties, so I don't think I can show you my image here that I want to, but I'll see if I can work that out later. Here's a very important point. I want to make sure that all of you know you can make comments and I can see them and I can answer them, especially if you disagree. I think I've been particularly provocative today. So some of you, for example, from agencies who are happy users of agencies may want to pillory me, may want to throw some virtual tomatoes at me. Please do. I would love to hear from you. Ernie is already saying reboot for the win. Thank you, Ernie. So please follow Ernie's example. As a matter of fact, it would be great if everybody could just say hi and say, what's your interest in this? Are you violently disagreeing with me that agencies can be dangerous? Maybe you'll change your mind by the end. Maybe you'll change my mind. I don't know. Are you someone who's used an agency and you found it difficult, or you're thinking of doing so, and you're wondering, how can I use a software agency most effectively? Please make a comment. I will not have a full hour's worth of material, which will be fine for me. I'll go play with the dog. But I'd much rather have a dialogue with you all the way through this. So please interrupt, ask questions, argue, debate. I think this is one that could be quite juicy, and I'd love to have people disagreeing with me, commenting, telling me things. So please, if you're watching, please make a comment now and let me know what brought you here, why are you interested in this topic, and how many tomatoes do you want to throw at me? Okay, so just a little intro for anyone who might not know. This is the Squirrel Squadron. This is my community of tech and non-tech people from all around the world. Ernie's from the US, for example. We have a bunch of other people. We have Martin checking in from the UK. I know we have people signed up from even other continents. So the squadron is, I think it's around 2,000 people these days, and it's tech and non-tech executives learning together. And I think it's the only community like that. I certainly don't know of any others. If you do, I'd love to hear about them, because there's lots of communities of CTOs and CFOs and COOs and folks like that, but none that kind of brings everybody together. And that's what I want to talk about. And agencies certainly do that, right? The CFO's got to pay the money. The CEO's got to see the results. The CTO has to deal with the agency, and all of those folks have to understand how to use those people most effectively. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We have a forum where people are discussing all these topics and bringing up ideas and having great debates. We had a wonderful debate on getting feedback from your team and making sure your team is rapidly telling you what's happening with them and how they can move fast. And we had a very technical debate, which then we were able to bring back to a less technical topic and make sure it was clear to everyone. So I really enjoyed that debate. We had Ben making a comment, which was very helpful in preparation for this event. I'm going to use Ben's example later. So that's straight off the forum where we're having those discussions. You can raise your own questions and debate and discuss topics from current events to fashion to and all of them with a tech focus. I was commenting on how I'm using ChatGPT these days, for example, the other day. And we have loads of events coming up. So I'm live in London next week. If you're not in the UK, that might be a little more challenging. Fly in if you want, but if you can't do that, there'll be a recording. The topic there is measuring your tech team. How can you know whether your tech team is giving you a return on investment? I just had a wonderful discussion with a very interesting founder in the travel industry this afternoon on exactly how she can measure her tech team. So I'd love to help you with the same in person in London or watch the recording. And then there's another one of these, another live stream, I think, which is on code ownership. So why it's a bad idea to have people owning certain parts of the code. So I imagine I'll get more tomatoes thrown at me there. So bring all your vegetables. Tell me why you think I'm wrong. That'll be another live stream on these same platforms in 2 weeks' time. We do one of these every week. This is all free. This is my way of giving back because so many people have hired me over the years to do wonderful things with their teams. I want to make sure more people learn. So let's make sure that we're talking about the right stuff. The agencies that I want to talk about are really dangerous in a good way. And I want to show you a picture if I can figure out how. And I really meant to do this beforehand, and I apologize that I didn't get the opportunity. Let me just see if I can figure out how to do it. Give me a second, because I must be able to do it on here somewhere. Present, that seems right. Share screen, there we go. It works best on a good computer. Okay, good. I'm experimenting with this. I'd hoped to do this beforehand. Apologies, I had the camera difficulty. I don't want to share audio. Because I'm already doing that. I hope you can hear me. So what I want to do, okay, I think I can find it. Apologies. Let's make sure I'm sharing the right thing. Come on. There it goes. Great, perfect. I have the right thing there. Now I just have to show it to you. And my good friend Laura is, she's our community manager, and she keeps all this stuff working. She actually understands how everything works, even when I don't. And she'll tell me whether she can see it appropriately. So where might that be? Where are you? Doesn't want to show it to me. Doesn't. Oh, let's see. Window. There we go. I want that window, I think. I hope so. Let's see if it does it. I have to unlock certain things. All right, we're not going to do that. Hang on, everybody. Believe me, this picture is going to be worth it. I promise. Let me see if I can do it in a slightly different way. There we go. All right, now I think I can share it over here. And I go like that. And like that. And the tab is not there. Why don't you want to do it? There it is. I found it. There we go. Okay, so I hope you're seeing that. This is a thing called a Sawzall, SAWZALL, and what this does is oh good, look at that, I can even see it. It's amazing. What this does is kill lots of people every year. No, that's not actually the reason it's manufactured. But it does. It's a very, very dangerous tool. I don't know how much of it you can see, but you've got this handle here, and you're holding that, and you pull back on the handle, and it's kind of like a machine gun for a saw. That it makes a saw blade that you can see going into the wood there vibrate at incredible speed. And it really will saw anything. It'll saw metal. It'll saw concrete. It's really called a Sawzall because it can saw anything at all. And of course, tradespeople love this, right? They have anything in front of them, they can saw it. Doctors do not love it so much because they get a lot of people in hospitals who have cut off various parts of their bodies because this thing is so powerful that it'll just go zipping along and cut off your arm or something like that. So I would never touch one of these. It seems absolutely terrifying to me because I am not qualified, right? I would create total disaster if I were to pull out a Sawzall and start trying to use it. Software agencies, in my experience, are like Sawzalls. They can do absolutely incredible, wonderful, fantastic things for you. You can solve problems that you would not be able to solve yourself. They augment teams. They increase your return on investment massively used correctly, just like a Sawzall can solve an immense amount of problems for you when you want to cut something up. But you can also really, really hurt yourself. And so that's my message to you is please be very careful when you're using a software agency. And I'm going to give you some of the ways to do so appropriately here. And I want you all to argue with me and debate about what you've seen, because you may have different experiences and you may know ways to mitigate the risks even better than me. Excellent. So Martin asks, how do you define agency? In my experience, there are many flavors. So that's an excellent question, Martin. Thank you. I did not pay Martin to ask that question, but it's perfect for this moment because that's exactly what I'm going to talk about. There are several different types of ways to use an agency. There's also different types of agencies. We go into that, but I'm going to focus on the different ways one might use one. And I'm going to focus on the kind of most dangerous, the one I've seen burn people the most. One is as an augmentor. So you have people in your team, they're already writing software for you. You have a group that's doing their work, and they just need more bodies. They need more smart people to join them, and it's hard to hire people. It's a little easier these days than maybe in 2021, but my God, it's still hard to hire technical people, and they're expensive as all heck, and they take forever to join you. So you say, great, I'm going to get some people from an agency, and they're going to join my teams as they are today. That augments the team. It just makes a team that used to be 4 people now is 6, and those folks work with my team, whether they're in some faraway place or they come and sit physically with the team. Then you're getting additional bodies in your team. There's also dangers to that. I'm not going to cover that quite so much today, although if people ask me questions about it, I'd love to answer. There's another way to use software teams, software agencies, and that is to kind of add a team to your current process. So you say, okay, great. I need some extra people who really know data science. And I'm going to bring in some super experts in data science, and I'm going to stick them in a team over here, and they're going to sit next to my front-end team and my back-end team, or you guys know I would prefer feature teams, so my team working on this feature, my team working on that feature. And they're going to be part of our process, and they'll check in their code along with us, and they'll work to the same process that we do, but they bring a special skill, or they bring a particular focus, and they're going to be their own team doing their own thing. This often happens when you're moving stuff overseas, so somebody in faraway places, you're in Remotistan someplace, and those folks in that distant place have their own team. They work to their own time zone, but they're working alongside your teams. Again, lots of dangers there. Pretty big sawzall, can cause some significant difficulties. But there's one that's more challenging, and that's the one I want to focus on today, the one that I've seen burn people absolutely the most. And that's where you say, I don't have any engineers, or I don't have any engineers working on this product. There's this completely new thing. There's something that's very different to what we do today, and it's not that I want to add things to what I've got. I don't want to take my current software and make it better. I want to make a new thing. And instead of hiring a bunch of engineers to build the new thing, I'm going to send that to an agency. And I'm going to say, agency, please build me from scratch this new, exciting, wonderful thing. And that's where I've seen people get burnt absolutely the most. So I'm going to talk about that type of software agency. Martin, I hope that answers your question. Now, of course, different agencies, the same agency may work in those different ways. They might do all of those different types of things. But I'm going to be talking about how you can most safely, or possibly not use agencies in that way, to build something from scratch for you. And that's where you can get the most benefit, just like the Sawzall, will cut through probably cut through your diamond counter or something like that. It'll cut through marble or anything, cut through whatever you've got. So it can be extremely valuable to launch a new product very quickly in that way, but it can also really, really burn you. Okay, so that's what I'm going to talk about. Let me have a quick look at different folks' comments. So Ernie says, mixed success using an agency, looking for pros and cons. Excellent, we'll talk about that. LinkedIn user, I don't always get to see your names. Sometimes LinkedIn's weird. Whoever that is says, interested to hear about pitfalls and mitigations. Going to do that for sure. Dudley is from an agency and wants to know how they can make themselves less dangerous. Absolutely. I will talk about that, Dudley. You hold me to it if I don't do that. Help me remember. And Ernie says he wants to figure out how to successfully integrate external developers into the core team. Okay, so that's the augmentation version. So Ernie, make sure I come back to that. And prevent the not invented here reaction to work developed outside the core team. That's one that can definitely happen with the one I'm about to describe. So I'll definitely cover that. Good. So we've got a bunch of good questions, and I think some more, but let me move on to a couple of stories. Now, there's one type of risk which I just feel I have to mention, especially given the time when I'm doing this. Now, you may be watching this into the distant future. World peace may have broken out. The world may be a very different place when you're watching this, because this recording will be here, I hope, in perpetuity, but certainly for as long as YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook are here. This recording will be at this same location. You can come back to it or send your friends to it. Or if you have to head out, you can come and watch the rest. So wherever you're and whenever you're watching this, the world may be different. But the world that we're in right now, as I sit here, is one in which there's two massive wars that are really destabilizing world governments and a lot of other, and the economy and everything else, and lots of other sources of instability. We have a major election coming up in the U.S. that may change a lot of things and how people work. My country, Britain, has recently left a major association, the European Union. This has changed a lot of rules. Lots of these things are happening all the time. And so a risk that people often talk about is how bad the geopolitical risk is. So I'm going to send this product all the way out to some faraway place, and this faraway place may not be very stable. I've got a client I've just been working with recently who flew to Pakistan to go kind of shore up and work with some of his folks there in Pakistan and try to augment what they're doing because he's sent a lot of his work there. And, Pakistan is perfectly stable and a great place to work right now. But there's some geopolitical tensions there, and something could very, very much change very quickly in some distant land. It could always happen to your own country as well, but these kinds of risks are always present. I think that's less of a risk than it used to be. And that's simply because of the amazing penetration of the internet. Many of you may not know that the internet was invented by American defense researchers, something called DARPA, and it was designed to survive a nuclear war so that you could continue watching videos like this after a nuclear holocaust. Well, not quite, but so that the military could communicate and keep things going, even when there's lots of interruptions. And so I'll tell you just a little story. I had an augmentation team. So I had people in Eastern Ukraine about 2014. And they were augmenting my developers and the team I was running at the time. And I didn't know very much about Ukraine. I could find it on a map, but I didn't know much about the political situation and so on. And suddenly they phoned me up and they said, hey, we're here in Eastern Ukraine. And we now all know what that means. But at the time I didn't. And I said, yeah, I know you're in Ukraine. Yeah. And they said, have you watched the news? And I said, well, there seems to be something going on. Does it affect you? And I hear bullets in the background, right? And the bombs and everything. And they said, yeah, it kind of does affect us. We're not going to work for you for the next week. And I said, great, well, get the heck out of there, because I didn't understand they were affected. I said, just make sure you're safe and take care of yourselves. And lo and behold, darned if they did not just relocate themselves to Western Ukraine, where there weren't any bombs falling at that time. And they just kept on working for us. It was as if nothing had changed. And I've seen that repeatedly in recent times with people who've outsourced to various locations that have all kinds of difficulties. I went and visited a team in Belarus not so long ago. You might have noticed there were some difficulties in Belarus not so long ago. I visited them before that, but as far as I know, they're banging away, doing their thing, continuing to provide services. So this is one that people tend to worry about a lot. I am less worried about it. It's not one that comes to the very top of my worry list when someone says, oh, yes, I've outsourced all my product development to place X. I say, I'm sure you've considered some of the risks there, and they certainly are present, and they're ones that you should consider. But I tell them, consider some of these other risks first. Okay. Now, let me turn to a different story that really illustrates the sawzall nature of outsourcing an entire product to an agency. I went to see a very small startup. I think it was essentially 2 people. And they had this was in a WeWork. I don't think they're quite dead yet, but they seem to be bankrupt, which does not often presages death. But in a WeWork somewhere in 2017 or something like that. And I walked in and they said, look at our amazing auction site. We can auction these things that we want to sell. And it works so well. And I said, that's fantastic. Why did you call me in? And they said, well, we want to get our own developers working on this now because we've had such commercial success. We have lots of people look at all these items being auctioned and sold and presented. And this system works well. And now we'd like to bring it in-house. And we have a problem with our agency. I said, oh, an agency built this for you. And they said, yeah. And they run it for us. And that's been very efficient for us, being 2 people who are not very technical. And we wanted to get to market quickly. And our market's working. Look at this. This is working great. Now we want to bring more of this into our own fold. And what we're noticing is that the agency keeps telling us that they can't give us our database. And I said, boy, that's very strange. It's your data with your items and the photos of the items and the costs and the transactions and all that stuff. It's your data. Why can't they give you the database? That seems like it'd be a natural thing for this developer you've hired to begin working with and to begin building a new system on top of. And they said, yeah, well, what they've done is they've actually used the same database. And I didn't understand what that meant. But eventually I came to understand an absolute horror, which was that the data from this customer was all mixed up. This particular startup was mixed up with all the other customers of the agency in one database. So there's one place where data was stored, and it was being stored for everybody all in one place. And so they couldn't pull out parts of it because, for example, somebody buying a T-shirt from a T-shirt company would be right next to, in the same database table, somebody who was buying an item from this auction site. And this was a really, really big problem. Of course, I like expensive problems. I like helping people with difficult challenges, and I got to do that, which was a lot of fun. It was not fun for the founders. This was a very painful experience, and I thought it was just hugely irresponsible of the agency to allow this to happen. It was very clear that these folks, if they took off, would definitely want their data. This wasn't running somebody's sort of friends and family website or something where you'd never want to take it in-house. This was very clearly a commercial operation where this would be necessary. And they had made no provision for it. They just used a common website building tool, which then put all the data all together, and they could not pull it out. And Stuart says, oh, my word, that's hellish. Yes, exactly. That was what I said. It took me a long time to understand that's what they meant. You really mean you put the data in the same database as other customers. I think you get in a lot of trouble with GDPR and things like that today. But some folks, unfortunately, are not under those jurisdictions, are not restricted by those rules. And they can get away with quite unpleasant sorts of things. Now, I'm going to give you some mitigations for this. But I think this would come in the category of commercial risk, because although it's a technical flub up, to put a very nice front on it, it's a technical screw up. It's because they commercially hadn't protected themselves. There wasn't a contract which said, we're going to be taking this back in-house. Here's what we expect from you. We expect to be able to get the source code in this way. And sometimes there are extra payments for those sorts of things, which should be written down. And that's reasonable. It maybe they run it for you for a while, and then because they're going to lose the income, they want you to make a payment to them for the process of transference. And that's reasonable if you make that commercial agreement. Problem here, of course, is the non-technical founders didn't know what to look for, and they signed whatever the contract said, which I'm sure said, oh, yes, and we'll store all your data together with everyone else's, or didn't even bother to say that. And they didn't understand that was going to be such a risk and such a cost to them down the line once they got successful. So look out for commercial terms that do not cover the eventualities that you might have. Make some plans for bringing your product back to yourself, bringing your own developers on. Make sure you have access to the source code. Make sure you have access to the data. And in fact, and this will be a theme all the way through this should be something that doesn't happen only at the end. Your agency should be providing you this material all the way through: documentation about how the product works, source code access, information about how to deploy it, data from the database. All of that should be available to you. And even as a non-technical person, you can check that. You can do it in a couple ways. You could go and look yourself. I mean, you can probably see that if you look at some stuff that is code, it'll have the right kinds of things in it, like references to auctions. If suddenly you look in there and it has references to weddings, you might say, wait a minute, this isn't me. So you can just apply your own brain. But even better, you could hire a local person, could be a contractor, could be somebody like me, to come and do an audit and check that these items are where they should be, and that the product is ready to be adopted by you or moved to a different agency. That makes sure you're not exposed to a sudden rise in prices, the unavailability of the agency, something happens to them. Back to the geopolitical risk or just financial risk they go under. You want to have these kinds of assets in your control, someplace safe. And if you're not sure how to check those things, then by all means, hire someone who can. It's not a terribly difficult task to verify that you have the right material that you could hand to some engineer at some point. So that's a good mitigation for, as Stuart said, the hellish scenario where your software is actually being run and maintained by people who have been so irresponsible as not to keep it accessible to you. And of course, that's kind of the most evil version. But I've certainly seen cases where the software developers didn't really have a nasty purpose. They were just overworked and doing too many things and didn't know that the customer would want this. And so they don't document very much, or they give you part of the source code, or they give you part of the data and they don't pick up that they're missing something. And if you're not knowledgeable about these things, you might not know either. it's absolutely valid to get someone to go and audit it and check that you have exactly what you need. And you should be doing that all the way through. So you might do that every month or every quarter, but you want to check as they're running the product for you. Are you getting the things that you need? Are you making sure that you could take over this product if you wanted to? So that gives you some mitigation against commercial risk. Richard says, wow. Yes, that's what I said. Wow. And a few other words with one more letter than wow. As I was shocked by this behavior. Now, there's another case, and this is one I'm very sad about because I was involved in it and I didn't catch it as soon as I wished to help this client. The client hired an agency to build a product for them, and the client provided a musical product. They were helping musicians to collaborate and do things with their audiences and so on. And they were originally doing this live, and then this strange pandemic thing happened, and suddenly nobody could do anything live anymore. And so they were moving on to the web, and they said, great, well, we'll just have the same kinds of things that we're doing over here, but we'll have them over here on this web platform. And they looked at things like just using Zoom off the shelf or Google Meet or one of those. And they said, those don't quite do all the nifty things that we want. So what we want is to hire someone to be an agency for us, build us something fairly simple over an open source or similar type of version of this. It could be Zoom, could be something else. But we want to have our own customizations, our own improvements, things that make it work for our use case, which is very different to what Zoom, say, is built for, right? It's built for business meetings and things like that. These folks were wanting to do performances and interactive audience activities and things like that. So they brought me on to help advise, and I looked at the agency's plans, and I pointed out some things that they might want to do to test and to verify that it was doing what it should do. And again, keeping with the theme I've been talking about, I said we should be testing this very frequently. We should get an early version, we should play with it, and we should do a musical performance. We should do a test with the interactive tools and so on. And they said, we'll work on that. We'll try to do that. Didn't happen in the event. And I have a lot of empathy for why my client didn't quite manage to do that. It was really, really disruptive to their business. As you can imagine, they were trying to continue to run their business in the face of the pandemic. And we might all remember how painful some of that was. So they didn't do what I recommended. And it's my regret that I didn't push them as hard as I could to get that meaningful feedback all the way along, because we got to actual customers. We had tried a few things a couple of times, and it looked okay to us. But then we got to actual customers, people who were musicians and who were wanting to do these performances and wanted to make things exciting and wonderful for audiences who were stuck at home. And they all came back and uniformly said, there's too much lag. And now you might know that as I'm speaking to you, it takes a certain amount of time for my image and my sound to make its way through the internet and get carefully to your computer and get rendered and get shown to you. And that doesn't bother us too much here, because if you hear me a half a second late, no bad thing happens. But these folks were trying to collaborate with their audience in doing musical performances, clap along to this and participate in that and all those sorts of things. And there was, it could even in some cases just be a few milliseconds, but it was enough that musicians noticed it. And it was really, really disturbing, because you can imagine, and it would get magnified because, the drummer would hit the drum and then the sound would take a little while to arrive, and then the bell ringer would hit the bell, and then the audience would try to clap, and all of those would get out of sync. And so when we tried to use this product, it was unusable. It was just dead on arrival, because the way they had built it had resulted in it really just not meeting the needs of customers. And the mistake that we made is I had pushed them enough and they hadn't acted on getting it in front of actual musicians in week one, because it's back to the Sawzall again. This was a very, very powerful tool. They were moving much faster than they would have if they tried to hire Zoom engineers or experts in video at that time. They were massively in demand. Everybody was trying to do something like this. If they tried to hire those people, they would have delayed their business, probably killed their business by a huge amount. So it was right to get somebody who could act instantly. These folks could start right away, and to get these pandemic friendly performances underway as fast as possible. That was the right strategy. The problem is the execution fell down because there wasn't enough feedback. There wasn't enough learning, and it wasn't clear enough to the people designing it, who were in a foreign country, not really understanding quite how this product worked, doing the very best they could, but did not understand that it would have this massive impact on the musicians. So that didn't end very well commercially for anybody involved. So there's somebody who's saying, how can we avoid having these problems on the agency side? One of the things you should vitally be doing is making sure that you are giving very frequent feedback. And I know many of my friends who work in agencies do that to the best of their ability, and clients aren't helping them. But I would make it, for example, a commercial obligation. You must look, you must give us feedback. We will stop work unless you give us feedback from actual customers about whether this product is working. Because the dangers, development teams who are in-house and very knowledgeable and work well make this mistake all the time too, right? So this happens very frequently to all types of development teams. It just gets magnified massively when you've got people typically overseas, but certainly not working in your business, not experts in your business, trying to read a requirements document, never my favorite thing, and trying to work from that spec to produce the product that your customers need. Very risky approach, and these folks really got sawed, whatever you would say. They got cut. Now we have Richard, who's saying some naive clients can create problems by trying to save money and focusing on the lowest cost. I did not pay Richard to say this. It's a very good point. I was just going to come to this. That sometimes means they are happy for the agency to host the code, platform, etc. Well, exactly. So this is where it's almost as if the Sawzall has a fun tune that it plays, or it's just sort of fun to play with. I'm sure it would be, right? And you could cut anything around you. Kind of intellectually, that sounds like a lot of fun. In practical terms, sounds extremely dangerous. But the problem is that agencies and any sort of software outsourcing looks like it's much less expensive. And especially appeals to people like CFOs. They say, oh, great, I can get this off the balance sheet. I can get this in a different part of the finances. I'm no financial expert, but we can account for it differently. The overall cost is different. We can get more engineers working on the problem. What's not to like about sending this work to a lower cost alternative? The problem is it's not lower cost. The problem is, and I did a podcast episode on this. I was on somebody's podcast. I'll see if I can dig it up, and I'll put it on the forum if I can find it. Oh yes, it was Vasco Duarte. It was I was on Vasco's podcast. He's an excellent product manager in Europe, and we were talking about how outsourcing your software is just as expensive as having your own engineers work on it, because you get all the frictional costs. And we've just talked through a few of the kinds of things that can go wrong. There's more. But those costs add up, and the additional management you have to do, the additional documentation you have to do. And we haven't even got to what happens when you're taking the product back in-house. There's additional cost that comes in at the end. All of those costs, in my experience, add up to as much or more than the cost of the cost savings you're getting by paying some people a slightly lower salary. And with the democratization and the globalization of the ability of people to get jobs, those differences are also narrowing, right? So there's a lower cost of living someplace, but that person is also competing with people in a higher cost of living location. And so one way that they compete is to raise their prices, right? Be more expensive. So they actually come close to locations where there's higher cost. So do not expect. So you might be expecting, I'm going to send this product to an agency. I'll get the product live faster. It'll cost me less. What's not to like? Well, we've just talked about some of the things that can go wrong in the product, so you don't actually get the product. And then I'm telling you, it's not actually going to cost less. So you really get the worst of all worlds when you do that. Now, I did say I wasn't just going to beat up my agency friends. None of you have thrown any tomatoes yet. I'm waiting. I got it right here. I'm ready to dodge. But what I'm not saying is that agencies can never work, or you can never have an agency work for you and give you a successful outcome. Absolutely not. And I've seen that happen many times. Just don't believe the myths. Don't believe the things that seem obvious, that seem most evident to you or obvious, that you would say, oh, well, that must be true. It's not. For example, don't expect to spend less, but you are going to get to market faster. That's something you will get, and that's worth doing, but just don't expect to do it for less. And Richard properly points out that some folks say, I'll go with the lowest bidder. I'm trying to save cost anyway, so I'll just go with the lowest bidder here. And then they fall victim to these other elements, just like Richard says. That then gives an incentive to the provider, to the agency, to cut corners, to put your data with other people's data, to not investigate the requirements enough, and so on. And you really get burnt on the back end. So it doesn't end well for agency, for client, or anyone else. Let's see. Richard also asks another question. Would you advise clients to have a proof of concept first? Well, that's an excellent question, Richard. Thank you. I would say this: do more than a proof of concept. Absolutely, do a proof of concept. And in fact, in the story I told about the musical performances, they did have a proof of concept. They had some things that you could play with and you could work with. They weren't. What they didn't do was then put that in front of actual customers, and they didn't do it frequently enough. And again, I feel badly that I didn't push them hard enough. I have learned that lesson now, but and I would do it differently today. But the problem was that although they had a proof of concept relatively early in the process, and it looked like it had all the right bells and whistles and all the nifty things that were different from Zoom, what they weren't testing was what happens when you get 30 people on, all of whom are trying to clap and sing and participate in the musical experience. That did not work. That was when they got into trouble. And had they had not just a proof of concept, but regular interaction where they were having real customers come on the platform, try the stuff that they were going to do and break it, they would have found out much, much earlier that there were hidden requirements, there were needs that their solution was not meeting. And so I hope that's helpful, Richard. So yes, proof of concept, but also every single week you should be seeing the product developing. And if you've just sent it overseas thinking, oh, I'm going to save money, I won't have to look at it, it'll just magically appear and it'll work like it is in this 30-page document, you're fooling yourself. That's almost certainly not going to happen. Richard, I hope that was helpful. Please ask more questions if you have them. Fantastic. So I have just one more example, and I'm going to end on a positive example here. But I don't want to end. What I want to do is answer your questions. So please, this would be the time. If you have more questions, just like Richard, it'd be great if you threw those in the chat now, because I'm going to tell this story and then kind of summarize the different risk mitigations we've talked about. And then, I'm going to go play with the dog if we're done. But I'd love to answer more of your questions. So put them in the chat now. I can see them on whichever platform you are. So this story comes straight from the forum, and I said I was going to use this one. Let me see if I can find it. I had it up over here. Where did it go? Sorry. There it is. Great. So Ben says, and I'm not going to say which Ben this is, and I'll omit any details that could identify Ben. He may be here, so he's welcome to chime in if he wants to. But Ben says, we had an agency re-engineer an existing product as cloud native to be handed back to in-house to operate and maintain. So his intention was to say, okay, you take this thing, you build it, and you make sure that it runs on the cloud. So we don't have to have machines and hosting and other stuff. It just magically runs in Amazon, and we don't have to worry about it. And that would be a big cost saving, I suspect, knowing a little bit about the business Ben was in. So he says this led to some friction around specification, acceptance criteria, and throughput because it was hard, he's saying, to communicate to the people what they should do. So this is the sort of thing that I was illustrating with the video example, the musician example, where hey, we're looking for it to do this, but it's actually not have the right throughput. It doesn't do exactly what it should do. It doesn't scale as well as it should. So he had those kinds of frictions and difficulties. But then, very interestingly, he says there was a steep learning curve at point of repatriation. Great word, Ben. With getting to know the functionality compounded by needing to grasp the technology. So he had people in-house who were wanting to take over this product and say, okay, great, we gave it to those folks. They were more expert in this technology and we're running in Amazon or the cloud or whichever cloud provider it was. And they're going to get that done. Hallelujah. And then we're going to take it back. The problem was that when it came time to take it back, it was more challenging both to learn about the thing they didn't know about before and to learn about this product and how it had been built. And so I'm marking this as a success because, in fact, better than the examples I'm describing where it's kind of dead on arrival, if I understand Ben's story right, this actually got live, this actually worked, but it was painful. So that's often what you find is you save money, you save time, more importantly, by taking something out to an agency, and you pay a cost on the other end. So what mitigation might you do here? Well, you want to make sure that you bring in people who have the skill. So if you're having people build something for you because they know more about it, bring on some of the people who know more about it so they can absorb it easily. And make sure, again, this is the theme all the way through this, you're interacting frequently, you're seeing how that works, you're bringing in the product, and you're building up the skill as you go, rather than saving it up for the end. And that's the thing I think I would say to Ben is if you're waiting for the end, and that's when you'll take the product back, you're kind of saving up all your costs. It's like a balloon payment on a mortgage or a loan. Oh boy, I've just been paying these small payments. It's great. I'm really enjoying my new boat, and it's really wonderful. Oh my God, I have to pay this huge amount. Oh, what happened? And that's what you want to avoid. So I'd want to amortize that pain over a longer period. But I think overall, this is one way that you could send out a product to someone, really get benefit from their knowledge and their skill and their ability to build that product for you with skills you don't have. And then assuming you've been keeping tabs on it, you've been training your staff as you go, and you're making sure that you understand how it works and you can take it over, again. And then it becomes your product. And that sounded like, certainly when I've seen those sorts of examples, they've worked out better. And it sounds like at least Ben managed to get his product in place. I asked him if he would do it again. He said no, but mainly because of this kind of big bang nature, where it was switching everything over at the end. So it would have been better to do things more incrementally, if I understand what he's saying right, reducing the number of moving parts needed. So you don't have to shift everything. You can shift a little bit at a time. You can get more of the product over time into the cloud, and that would have worked better for him. So I hope that's a helpful description. Now, last chance for questions. I've managed to avoid all the tomatoes. No one has come along and said, Squirrel, you got it all wrong on agencies. They're absolutely wonderful. This is how you should use them. And if that's what you think, then I'm very happy. I've stunned you into silence. But, if you're watching this on the recording and you're saying to yourself, I wish I'd been there. I can't believe this. The Squirrel's got it all wrong. Or I have this question. He didn't cover it. There's a great way for you to get that through. And that is join up to the Squirrel Squadron. And that's at squirrelsquadron.com, which I will just put up here. So if you come along and join the Squirrel Squadron, then you can get on the forum and you can ask questions and argue and discuss. There'll be a follow-up post here. I'll see if I can find that item I referred to earlier. I can't even remember what it was, but I'll listen back and I'll find it, and I'll put that on the forum. And there'll be a discussion after, and we'll continue to answer questions and look at these topics. You can come to a future event and argue with me and debate it. And you know what? My email and my phone number and all kinds of other stuff is there on Squirrel Squadron. So feel free to get in touch with me there as well. So I appreciate it. No more questions. So I assume that we're good. Andy says, thanks. Very informative. So glad to be informative. I always like doing that. Oh, here we go. Dudley says, how can an agency be less dangerous? I think that's what you asked me before, Dudley. And let me emphasize the most important thing I think you can do. And that is to very frequently interact with your customers. And Dudley, I'm assuming you work at a good agency where people know what they're doing and they're very clever, and they probably want to do that. But they may need commercial support for that. So, for example, you might write it into your contract that your customer, the people that are hiring you to build the product, need to give you feedback frequently based on their actual customers. I would say that that's the thing that in pretty much every case, if they'd gotten earlier feedback, if they got more frequent feedback, if they interacted more often, the people who hired the agencies would have had much better results. And of course, it would be a much better result for the agency as well to have a happy client than one who's miserable. Martin, so Dudley, I hope that was helpful. Say so if I've missed anything. Martin says, the model with a 30-page spec, throw it over the wall, wait 3 months, get something useless. That peaked in about 2002 when we were outsourcing to India. Yes, unfortunately, there's still an awful lot of people who follow that model, or they don't think they are, but they actually do. And that's why the interaction is so valuable and so important. Okay, well, Martin's underlined it for us, and I appreciate that. Really, Dudley says yes. Good, I answered his question. Thank you, Dudley. Good question. Glad you did it. And I'd love to hear from all of you on the forum. I'd love to see you at future events, especially if you're in London. Stop by next week in person. I'm looking forward to quite an exciting event there with lots of questions, lots of challenges on how to measure your tech team. So squirrelsquadron.com. I'll see you over there. And I'll see you next week in London or in 2 weeks for another live stream. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Thanks so much.